So in this video, I'll give you a sneaky peek at some of what's coming up by briefly telling you about two psychologists who feature more prominently than others in this unit. And then I'll tell you more about the modes of delivery that we're going to use, the methods of learning and teaching that we're going to apply in this unit. So, who are those psychologists? Well, you'll likely have heard of one of them, and you might have heard of the other. The other one is one who appears a lot on social media. He's published a self-help book, which has been particularly popular among young men. If you don't fit that demographic of being a young man and a social media consumer, you might not have heard about him. His name is Jordan Peterson. And we're going to look at some of what he said about the topics of gender and sexuality and think about what that says about what psychology has said about gender and sexuality. The other psychologist is one perhaps more familiar to you if you've studied psychology for a while, but it's also a name that is well known outside of psychology. It's Stanley Milgram, famous for his obedience studies, where he shocked people, literally, with electricity, or rather he pretended to. And what's interesting about his work is how psychology has mostly engaged with it. And there's some things that might surprise you in that material, or dare I say, might shock you. I'm sorry about that. Our methods of learning and teaching on this unit will comprise of 3 T's and 1 D. I talked about them briefly in a previous video. So what we've got teaching videos, we've got tutorials, we've got a textbook, and we've got our discussion forums. So let's start with the teaching videos. Now you might think of these as our pre-recorded lectures, but they might not be what you'd expect if you think of them as lectures, because they're not your traditional PowerPoint lecture. I've got a video on my YouTube channel on the reason for moving away from PowerPoint, so you can have a look at that if you want more of an explanation. But by way of a quick explanation, PowerPoint is good for delivering content, but that's not the main aim of this unit. I'll tell you what the main aim is in just a second, but first, just to be clear, you're not going to get a PowerPoint presentation, so you're not going to get PowerPoint handouts. But the lectures are pre-recorded, so you can stop, rewind, pause, rewatch them, so you're able to make your own notes in the absence of receiving my notes. And actually, I need you to get used to that practice of making your own notes rather than relying on my notes, because that's going to help you with one of our assignments, the reflexive diary. And more about that in a later video. So PowerPoint is good for delivering content, but this unit is not focused on delivering content. So what is it focused on? Well, it's focused on delivering skills, to deliver you skills, help you develop skills, specifically to help you develop your ability to articulate social and critical psychology concepts from both mainstream and diverse perspectives, to identify the social cultural contexts that influence individual differences in beliefs, values, and behavior, to evaluate social psychological concepts, research, and theories from a critical perspective, and to explain how privilege, power, and oppression affects prejudice, discrimination, and inequality. And in case you hadn't guessed, those are the learning outcomes for this unit. And those learning outcomes form the basis of your assessments and inform the way I've put this unit together. Now, you might have noticed that they were the learning outcomes because they sound a bit janky. But don't worry, we're going to come to them in multiple ways. The key thing is that these are the learning outcomes or the sort of learning outcomes that you don't achieve from learning content or from memorizing facts or following instructions. You achieve them from engaging with arguments, through engaging with discussion with others. And to help you with that, we have our tutorials and our discussion forums. Now, the teaching videos are available on YouTube. If you access them there, you may get adverts. Adverts may play at the start and the middle and the end, or maybe just at the start and the end of their short videos. Look, I don't get any money from that. I don't get any revenue, any money at all from those adverts, but YouTube does, so you need to be aware of that. The reason I put the videos up on YouTube is so that you can access them before you're enrolled in the unit, because some people like to start early so they can manage their time better. And you can also continue to access those videos long after you've finished the unit, actually long after you've finished your degree. You just have to remember where my YouTube channel is. It's not difficult to find. It's Paul Ducker. Just remember my name. If you can remember that, you'll be able to find my YouTube channel. But the videos are also up on YouTube because it gives the public access to the ideas that we're going to discuss. And that's important because the university receives public funding. We're not a private corporation. In the old days, academics really only communicated with the world outside by publishing books and publishing journal papers. But those were really only read by academics. And that's still the case today. It's really only academics who read academic journals and academic books, and students who are forced to. These days, we've got to engage with the public a bit more directly and effectively. And that's why I make my teaching videos accessible to the public. That's part of that. It's part of that remit. Now, don't worry, you don't have to watch my videos on YouTube. If you're enrolled in my university and you're enrolled in this unit, then you've got another option. Because when you're enrolled in the unit, you can access the videos directly through the learning and management system called Moodle. So you can play the videos in Moodle. You'll see, you just hit the play in Moodle and it'll play in Moodle. And that will help you avoid sitting through the adverts, that Google puts in there. So if you're watching them on Moodle, you don't get the adverts. So do that if you don't want the adverts. You also get other benefits from being enrolled in the unit, which is access to the Moodle discussion forums. And there are two forums. One's called the General Discussion Forum, which is where you can post messages that other classmates can see. I don't use that forum. That's just for you and your classmates. If you want to ask me a question, you want to involve me in a discussion, you can use the second forum, which is called the Q&A forum. And if you go to Moodle, you'll find all the details on those two forums on the Moodle pages. The other thing that we have, again, just for you, if you're enrolled on the unit, is our live tutorials. Now, these aren't recorded, except for the opening part, where I talk through the agenda for the tutorial. And sometimes I record the end part if there's any summing up that needs to be done. I don't record the main part of the tutorial. And the bit that I do record isn't made publicly available. It's put up on YouTube, but it's unlisted. So you can only access those videos if you have that direct link to the video. And I only put that direct link up on Moodle. Now, why do I only record the bit at the start of the tutorial, maybe a bit at the end, but I don't record the main part of the tutorial? Why do I do that? Or rather, why don't I do that? Why don't I record the main part of the tutorial? Well, it's because the tutorials are designed purely for live delivery. And it's because in those tutorials, you'll be working with your classmates in small groups on various activities that I'm going to set. And the activities are all designed to help you with the assessments. The tutorials are designed to help you learn through engaging in live, real-time discussion with your classmates. You have to participate in the discussions live to be able to learn from them and to learn from your classmates. You can't just watch your classmates having a discussion. You can't just watch the video of them having a discussion because you're not taking part in the discussion. But it also wouldn't be fair on those classmates, to record them and to make that recording available for other people who missed the tutorial. Because first, it puts a lot of pressure on classmates, knowing that they're being recorded, knowing that other students are going to watch them at a later time. So they're going to have to mind their P's and Q's and, behave themselves. But it also can be a bit stressful knowing that you're being recorded. It's also a bit voyeuristic. And it's not something that classmates have signed up for, to be recorded so that they could be used as a cheap teaching resource on the unit. So we're not doing it for that reason as well. Now, don't worry if you can't attend the tutorial because, you have to be there at a certain time on a certain day. If you can't attend because you've got family commitments or work commitments, don't worry, because all the information on the tutorial activity is going to be provided beforehand on Moodle, and you can use that information to organize your own tutorial. You just need to reach out to your classmates via the Moodle discussion forum, see if anyone else missed the tutorial and wants to find another time to run a tutorial themselves, to run their own separate tutorial. And if there are, then you just organize to meet up with them. You can play my intro to the tutorial. You can play my video, seeing me introduce the tutorial, and then turn me off and get on with the tutorial. You can just run it yourself. It's fairly easy to do. You just got to follow some instructions that I give for the activity and then just engage in the activity with your classmates. So you can organize it yourself. Now that gets me to that final mode of delivery, the textbook. Well, it's a textbook. What do I need to explain? You read it. What's more to say? Well, there's a few things I need to say. First of all, it's a few years old, but it's perfectly fine. It's from 2015 if you're using the second edition. I think I've recommended the second edition of the textbook. There might be a later edition. I think there's a later edition of the textbook, a third edition. There might be a fourth edition by now, maybe even a fifth edition. You don't have to worry about getting a newer edition. You also don't have to worry if you pick up the first edition rather than the second edition. It's perfectly fine. The reason I don't worry about what edition it is and why I still use the second edition every year, like I'm not updating it every year, is because I want to give the opportunity for last year's students to sell their textbook to you at a cheaper price. So you don't have to go out and buy a new textbook. And they also can recoup some of the money that they spent on their textbook. And you can do the same. When you finish this unit, hopefully successfully, and you want to sell your textbook on, you should be able to do that with next year's students because it'll be the same textbook. Now, publishers don't like that. They want everyone to buy the latest edition of their textbook. And they also want libraries to buy the latest edition. That's the other thing. If I set the new, change the textbook every year to the latest edition, the library's got to buy a new textbook every time. I want to save them a bit of cash because they don't have as much cash as you might imagine. And we've got to protect our library resources. So I do it for that reason. Publishers like to make money. There are no great major breakthroughs happening that requires new editions of the textbook. So in Critical Social Psychology, don't worry. You're not missing out on anything if you buy the 2015 edition. They might use different examples of more contemporary social events, but the content's going to be roughly the same. It's just the chapters and page numbers don't align. If I ever say, have a read of chapter 2, you just got to check that chapter 2 in the second edition of the textbook aligns with the chapter in the new edition. But don't worry, we'll sort that out when we get there. There is something else that I need to tell you about the textbook. you won't necessarily find that the textbook aligns with the unit. Certainly it won't align at all times. Sometimes it will. Sometimes it'll just cover some background stuff. Other times you could find there's going to be a conflict between what the textbook says and what I say. Why is that? Well, it's because academics disagree, particularly in psychology. There's not a single thing that all psychologists agree on. Nothing. Not a single thing, I promise you. Not a single thing they all agree on. Now, I could have chosen my own textbook, because then you presume I'd at least agree with myself, which actually, you'd be surprised, I often disagree with myself. But I could have set my own textbook, and I've got a textbook. I wrote one a few years ago with some colleagues. It's called Critical Community Psychology, which is near enough the same as Critical Social Psychology. But there are two reasons why I haven't done that. First, there's a massive conflict of interest. You know, I make money from that textbook. Not a lot of money, because academic textbooks don't sell in huge numbers, but I do get a royalty check every year from the poor mugs who go and buy the textbook. So I don't want to do that. That's the same reason that I won't make money off of YouTube, because there's a conflict of interest. If I'm asking you to go and view something that I make money off, that's a conflict of interest. So I'm not going to do it for that reason. But there's another reason, which is that you need to hear someone else's voice. You shouldn't just rely on what I'm telling you. I want you to listen to the voice of other academics. I want you to hear what they've got to say. And one of the ways I can do that is by setting that textbook that's written by someone who's not me. Now, the important thing to know is that each of these teaching modes, teaching videos, tutorials, discussion forums, and textbook, are discrete, insofar as you can't just access one of them to be able to get the materials from the others. So the teaching videos, they're not going to be discussed specifically in the tutorials, and they're not covered in the textbook. So you can't just skip those teaching videos, what you might think of as lectures, hoping that the information will be found elsewhere. It won't. And you can't skip reading the textbook, because that material won't be covered in either the tutorials or the teaching videos. So basically the key here is don't skip any of the modes of delivery. Don't skip the teaching videos, don't skip the tutorials, don't skip the textbook, and don't skip the discussion forums. You need to access all of them in order to be successful on the unit. Actually, you need to access all of them for this unit to make sense, or to make enough sense. Okay. So, this has gone on for a little while. This is a longer video, lots to explain. I'll try not to make too. I'll try, what am I doing? I run out of words. I'll try to keep my videos short. So, that's my introduction to the methods of learning and teaching, and to those two key psychologists that are going to appear in our unit. Jordan Peterson, Stanley Milgram. So till our next video, ta-da.